Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to the Master Tech Lou channel. I am Lou. Today I'm doing an engine oil cooler leak in a 2016 Grand Caravan. Here's the guy. Chrysler made them out of plastic. Okay, so two things happen. One, either the seals just fail over time. I have 96,000 miles on this van, right? Either the seals fail over time, or what happens is the plastic housing will crack due to it being plastic and having age on it. So I would recommend about 80 to 90,000 miles, get this done. I normally don't like to replace stuff if it ain't broken, but with this being in the middle of the engine, when it does go, all of your oil pressure goes through here. So if it's leaking, it's just spraying out your oil. I caught mine yesterday morning in the driveway and drove it right to the shop and doing it now because it doesn't take long to lose all 5-6 quarts of your oil. So I'm already down to the oil cooler. I have it all clean and ready to reassemble. What I'm gonna do is, this is a little bit different of a video. I do mine kind of in reverse sometimes. So I'm gonna show you all of the things you need to do and then show you how it looks when it's installed. It's kind of a little bit easier to understand sometimes when you're not watching me take it apart. I'm not in your way. I can show you how it looks and then assemble it. So in the video, it's gonna look straightforward, but what I'm actually doing is I'm already repairing it, but I'm gonna do it backwards on my end and then cut it all together. So let me know how you like it. Let me know if this is helpful. For ease of doing this job, for the skill that it requires to do this job, it's super easy. It really is. There's a couple of 10mm nuts. There's a 13mm bolt. A lot of those, what we call Christmas tree push clips that you got to pry out. Quite a few connectors you got to unplug. I'm also doing spark plugs while it's out because you have to take off the plenum to get to the spark plug. So I'm doing those as well. It's not that bad of a job. I mean, for difficulty, 3 out of 10. It might have taken me 15 minutes to get down to this guy. The worst part was relieving the fuel pressure, which I didn't do right, sprayed everywhere. And then also you want to relieve the coolant pressure or let it cool down some, because there is a coolant hose that goes through here and coolant goes through the block. So if you're trying to do it under pressure, it's going to spray everywhere. And just realize that whatever you take this loose, it fills up a lot in this valley. There's so much space in this cavity. There was a lot of oil in there. There must have been 2 quarts. Kind of scared me. So, and of course I'm doing an oil change too, because you're gonna get some coolant into oil. And I might even think about doing a coolant flush because I may have get some oil into coolant. And coolant hoses do not like oil. They like to swell and they will rupture. So I'm gonna show you how to do this. Show you my tips when I do repairs. Doing a how-to, easy. It's easy to teach people how to do something. But I want to teach you what I do and why I do the things, which may help you in whatever repairs you're going to do, even if not just this repair. So I'm going to go ahead and get this undone or done or redone. We'll figure it out. So here's the valley now that the oil cooler is out. All right, there's a coolant passage right there. The coolant passages, it looks like, and I believe this would be the oil passage, and that would be the other oil passage, and we can look at the oil cooler to see. Nope, that's going to be coolant right there. Oil in this guy. A couple different things here, a couple different things going on. This also comes with a temperature sensor and a pressure switch, all included. This is a dealer part. I actually got mine from O'Reilly's. They sourced it and they gave me a pretty good discount, a couple bucks off. Here's the part number here. Okay. So on this, the only thing you have to loosen is there's 3 E8 Torx right there and 2 E8 Torx right there. I also blew out all the holes, and I'm going to soak up the rest of that coolant and oil as much as I can. The rest will cook off when the engine runs up the temperature. Now, when you're doing something like this, all of these connections were swimming in oil, so I'm going to clean these up too. And then I gotta watch to make sure these seals don't swell. I gotta make sure they snap back into the knock sensors very well. I'm worried that if this isn't caught and quick enough, the oil will wick up this wiring and lead to the control module. So I also use pinch off pliers to pinch off the coolant hose so I don't lose excessive coolant. Okay, that's a neat trick. Get some of those pinch off pliers. I'll show you what they look like. Got a bunch of them. Blue Point, Cornwell, Snap-on, they all the same. Okay, pinch off pliers. So it squeezes and it clamps down a hose without damaging it. Old school guys will use vice grips, but that can cut and nick a hose. So I also vacuumed as much as I could all of the debris that's up here. Always want to make sure there's nothing in the cylinders. If you want, you can use rags and stuff them in the holes while you're working, so nothing gets in there. I typically stay pretty clean. I use magnets. I got coils up here, spark plugs I already did over here. So I got the tubes all out. I got my spark plugs lined up how I took them off, or my coils rather. This one, first bank, this one, or cylinder, boom, 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 and then the back three, boom, 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 so I know which way they go, so they go back in the same spot. All the connections are pretty straightforward. Some have locks, some don't, but they all thumb release tabs, right? And then of course when I plug everything in, I'm gonna make sure that the connections are clean and that I'm not gonna force them in to bend any pins. All right, there's a couple vacuum hoses here, which again, I'm doing this video backwards, so some of this may be redundant, but I'm gonna show you where everything connects and how everything goes together. So go ahead and get this cleaned up and get that installed. Okay, the oil cooler is in. There's only 5 bolts to it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, it's an E8. I use a Snap-on 1/4 inch one swivel to go ahead and spin them out. All right, and then they torqued down to 14 Newton meters or 106 inch-pounds. And I got the hoses. There's a hose here that needs to be removed. 2 switches need to be unplugged. Underneath there, there's 2 knock sensors that need to be unplugged. Again, I have hose pinch-offs to minimize coolant loss. I'm going to clean around the intake. I already vacuumed, but I'm gonna clean again. And let me show you what I clean with. Plastic razor blades. They do make such a thing. They're plastic and they don't cut, right? Because it's aluminum, you don't want to cut it. You just want to scrape the surface, okay? Now it's okay to see a stain. If you can't feel it with your finger, then it's fine. We don't use wire wheels or cookies, that they call them. You don't want to buzz because aluminum will wear right off. So all I'm gonna do is clean a nice, just so it's nice and smooth, and I'll use a rag to wipe it down with some brake clean to clean up the cylinders, and then I'll put the intake back on. All right, I razor blade them off, and then I'll use a lint-free rag and some brake clean, and I'll wipe down to clean up what I can. Okay. I prefer a lint-free over a linty rag because you don't want this in the oil. You don't want it in the cylinders or in the oil filter. All right, here's the lower intake. All there are 3 8mm right there. There's a 4th one here. And 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's 8 total, right? 8mm to take this up. We got upper gaskets, and then we have lower seals. We'll call them seals. All right, so I'm gonna peel all those out. Injectors look good. I'll spray with some brake clean again to clean this up, and then torque them down. Okay, so these have a little bit of extra flashing on them. You want to make sure they go into the grooves and they push in. Okay. If they stick out when you go to install it, one can flip over and fold. So when you look at it, there's a little bit of a raised portion. That's what squeezes and seals. There's a little bit of a raised portion. So I want to make sure they stay in there. I don't ever add any, I don't say never, but you rarely add glue or adhesive to make sure they stick. Usually if it's nice and dry, they'll stay in there. So I'll do the top side. Again, verify the bottom's nice and installed. They're all in there. Nothing's hanging out. They look good. Go ahead and install it back on there. Once you can feel some bolts slide into the holes, I'll go ahead and I'll start from the middle outwards, tighten them and torquing them down. All right, I got it secured down there, so I'm going to go ahead and torque them to 12 Newton meters, starting from the middle outwards. As soon as I get my right socket, 8 millimeters. All right, so with the upper intake off, to get the fuel line loose, you're gonna pop up this lock. There's a tab on each side, okay? I just took it out, make it easier, okay? You can take it out, and then from underneath, you can squeeze the white tab, okay? You squeeze this upward, and then when you squeeze it upward, you're able to pull the line off, all right? What you wanna do first is remove the what I do is while the engine's running, you can pull the fuel pump relay till it dies, or you can just shut the car off, pull the fuel pump relay and crank it until it doesn't fire no more. That way you know all the fuel pressure's gone. But if the engine is hot, there will be some pressure that's there because it boils in the fuel rail. So just be safe. I always put a rag around it when I pop them loose. That way the rag absorbs most of the fuel, and then wear safety glasses and stuff too. That way it doesn't spray you in the eyes and in the face. So the one thing I wanted to be sure of is with this new oil filter housing assembly is I took it apart and it did come with a new oil filter, okay? And there's O-rings on there. But just don't assume that because you bought it that everything's good. Take it apart and just make sure the filter's in there. Make sure it looks good. Make sure the O-rings are not cut or anything like that, because the last thing you need to do is start up with no oil filter in there or torn seals. So, yep, that's what I did. I went ahead and took it apart just to be sure. So far, so good. So just one of those things I just wanted to be like, you know what? I didn't even think about that. I need to think about that. Let me just double check that. So anytime you get new parts, don't just throw them in there. Take a physical look at them and just make sure that everything looks good, right? I made sure all the O-rings were there. They were all installed correctly. You know, the sensors look good. The switch looks good. No bent pins. So just double check. All right, so before we take this out, we got 6 injector plugs, a couple of these Christmas tree things that you pop out. And what I use for those is I have a pry tool set. I got a set of these from Harbor Freight. Okay, I got 2 different sets because I modify them. Let's see, where's the one that I was using here? It should be out here somewhere. There's the one that I modified. I ground it down to make it nice and narrow. It makes it easy to put these in here and pop them up. And then I also have one, I got a second set that I heated and bent 90, so that way it's easier to get in there and pry stuff up. So there's a locking tab. You pop up all the red locking tabs, and then you're able to squeeze the release tab to get it to release. So 6 injector plugs, coil plugs, and then I laid all the wiring harness up out of the way. So here's the intake manifold removed. There is 2 10mm nuts that go to a bracket that mounts right down here, okay? So what I did was I unbolted them and I pulled it backwards and then out. All right, and then in the center, we have 4 bolts up here, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the front, 2, 4, 6, 7. Is there one in there? Nope, 7. We got 7 bolts that hold the intake manifold on. All right, I'm gonna torque those down. And then we have vacuum lines that come off. There's one here. There's gonna be a bracket that goes into the back, which I'll show you. There's a vacuum line there and a vacuum line there. And here they 3 are. Everything lays pretty easy to where they go. So here's the whole intake with it removed. Okay, pretty simple. Okay, so we have one bracket there with a 10 mil. And we have one bracket there, or a nut rather, right there. Okay. So we got these 10 mils that go on there. Put those back on there. Nope, can't do it with one hand. And then in the back, there is, let's see, we got these vacuum hoses, okay? There's 3 of them. All right. We have this bracket here. Okay. Goes like so. Okay, so we got one stud here, one stud here, and then down here, what this clips onto is going to be this guy, 13mm. Okay, I'll show you again with some light. So there's one stud right there, one stud right there, and then at the bottom, you got the 13mm bolt that comes out, okay? And that takes out that bracket to the rear. And then you got one vacuum hose here, one vacuum hose there, and one vacuum hose there. All right, so up top, we have a couple Christmas tree connectors, okay? Got a map sensor. We got the electronic throttle control. And then there's going to be a sensor on the air filter housing. Okay, so this air intake portion is very simple. It just squeezes onto the throttle body. There's a push clip that I always spray with silicone first, because when they're dry plastic, they don't want to release. And then in the back, there are 2 ball sockets that just squeeze onto these guys here. So when you get those off, make sure you spray some, I got some silicone spray that I use to spray in there, and I'll get that seated back up on there. Seem to want to see it. There we go. Got it. Push, clip. There we go. So I'll show you how it looks. There's the push clip there. And in fact, that's what I use one of these guys for, to get in there underneath it pry it up. But we got that installed. This one does not have a lock on it, just a push clip. Make sure it's snapped in. All the plugs. Air filter, just an 8mm. I also spray these too. Okay, what happens is dust and dirt builds up in everything in the cars. So lubrication on these parts goes a long, long way. And even though I sprayed it on, this stuff dries. It dries for the most part, so I know it looks all wet, but it's not going to cause any issue. So much easier. Okay. PCV hose goes from the valve cover to the intake, or I'm sorry, air filter box. Okay, I'll move that off so I can tighten these down. Just a little bit. And use my swivel. Nice and secure. Tube on there. Okay. Now fill with oil. All right, so the engine oil cooler is leaking, but not anymore. It's all repaired. Now you may ask, how did I know that it was the issue that was leaking? So there's two ways. One morning I started up my van and I smelled a burning smell that I haven't smelled before. If we look down here, you can see the initial tube that goes to the bottom, way down there, okay? That tube way down at the bottom, see a little silver shiny? That was full of oil, okay? Not only that, is most engines that are in a V shape, they have what's called a weep hole. So that little hole right there is what's called a weep hole, all right? Weep hole, weeping, crying. Also, you can see in the valley there, down by the knock sensor, if there's oil and coolant in there, all right? And then on top of the trans, there's puddles of oil, okay? So the only way for oil to get up here, actual engine oil, is if it came from the V, all right? That's how I knew that, and drips on the driveway because it carried off the transmission into underneath the car. So that's it. The last tip I will give you, if you wanted to, since the oil cooler was new, you can take out the oil filter and put a quart of oil in there so that way you prime the engine. I did not do that. My engine, I should have done that, but I did not. So, but that's one tip that I would do in the future, is I would take the oil filter loose and pour some oil in there. That way it's at the ready. My only thinking was it's no different than doing an oil change and it would be dry, but there'll still be some oil floating in the system. So ideally I should have done that. I just cranked it over a few times to build some oil pressure before I started it. So I will let it run to operating temperature. I will check the oil and make sure it's full and take it for a drive and verify it's not leaking again. And I will set the clock for another 90,000 miles till it happens again. So I hope this video helps. Check out one of my other videos. There's something that you can learn in all of mine. The key takeaways here are: make sure you torque things, make sure you check the connections. I do love videoing when I work because it helps me remember where stuff goes at the same time. If you ever do a new job and you're not sure where stuff goes, take pictures and video along the way. There's nothing wrong with that. You can use whiteout to mark when you do stuff. I'm just going over all the nuts and bolts that I did again, so I'll recap one more time. So to do this repair, air filter housing comes off, PCV line comes off. There's two 10mm nuts that hold this to the bracket here. There are bolts for the intake plenum up top. This guy is just held in by a push pin and 2 rubber sockets in the back. There are 3 vacuum lines. There's a bunch of connections down into the intake manifold, little sensor section. We have ignition coil plugs, cam sensor plugs if you need to take those apart. But it's ideally not a hard job. I would say if I wasn't videoing and I didn't have to clean up that much oil and coolant, this whole job would have taken maybe a max of 2 hours. Maybe a max of 2 hours. It took me literally 20 minutes to get down to the oil cooler. It's very, very easy to do. There's lots of room in the engine bay to work. Just make sure that the coolant is not pressurized, make sure the fuel system's not pressurized, make sure you have the key off. I didn't disconnect the battery. The only time I do that is when I'm worried that a wire is going to short circuit, like a starter wire or alternator wire, or if I'm working around fuses and stuff. Other than that, I myself don't disconnect the battery, but in anything you work on, I always tell you to disconnect the battery first. So I did drain the oil to make sure I got all the oil and old coolant out, just to have everything fresh, due for an oil change anyways. Sorry, I'm picking my air filter is good. It's ideally not a hard job to do. This I would recommend to anybody with some basic hand tools and basic mechanical knowledge. The tricky part is just torquing the bolts. You just got to find the right torque specifications. The work information told me 10 Newton meters, but here on the intake plenum, it literally says 7 to 9 Newton meters, which I found funny. So thanks again, subscribe, hit the notification, and talk to you later.